All right, welcome to another episode of EMF Warriors here on our podcast. I am pleased to announce today that I've got who I consider the world famous Dr. Jack Kruse here. I admire him so much. Really, I've been following him for years. I'm a Platinum Club member of his. Really, I've wanted to get him here on for a while and finally have the day to do that. Welcome, Jack.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, so at our EMF Warriors Facebook site, we talk about all kinds of issues all the time. Of course, we get a lot of people on there that are electrosensitive. As you know, I'm a little electrosensitive, and people with EHS as well. And I get questions all the time, and of course, it's a hard thing to do, trying to intersect the biophysics to let people know what good strategies are in their lives, because they're at different levels of their EHS. Really, all the intersections with EMFs is crazy, because we have demyelination, we have blood-brain barrier stuff, permeability, we have VGCCs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And really, the top question I have has to do with people with EHS trying to reverse their issues. What is, besides the normal stuff we know for mitigation, what other things can really be done for these people to get, especially the pain, like the pain aspect. People feel like they're sometimes on, prickling, on pins and needles. Other people feel items like me occur, like when I touch my phone and it happens to be connecting, and I get eye issues that occur, of course, as you know. Just like all the manifestations of issues are so vast. Besides just escaping these things, is there anything else that we're missing?
Well, I mean, the key thing that you have to realize for EHS, especially that disease, to understand it fundamentally, I guess the best way to describe it's an allergy to EMF. And it's an allergy to a specific kind of EMF. What people don't realize, 7.83 hertz and all the harmonics of the Schumann resonance are native. Anything between 250 and 780 is native. That's good, okay? That doesn't cause EHS. Now, the reason why there's a myriad of different symptoms, as you know, Scott, in the electromagnetic spectrum, there's 73 octaves, okay?
Right.
So that means each specific frequency can lead to a different symptomatology. So thankfully, the FCC has not licensed out the entire spectrum yet. So you are going to see manifestations. In my opinion, what we're going to see over the next 10 to 20 years is, as we continue to go up on the Gs, we're going to see new changes occur. So for example, especially as a Platinum member, I've been warning people for the last 18 months that when we go to 5G, the number one thing you're going to see is huge induced currents on the surfaces of our body. So in fact, if you went on my Dr. Jack Kruse Facebook page today, guess what today's trend is? Teach people how tattoos in 5G are a canary in the coal mine. Why? Because tattoos all use D-shell electron metals, meaning they're called transition metals. Right. The most famous one that people know about is iron, and that's usually in red ink. So when you introduce a 5G network, you're going to start to cause massive problems with the skin. Now, what's the jump-off point for people? Well, if you screw up the skin, that means you're going to have problems with vitamin D because you cannot make it. Then you're also going to have problems with leptin. Why? Because where is human fat? Right below. Yeah. See right there? And guess what? It needs to get energized to get into your hypothalamus at night. It needs UVA and infrared A light. Well, guess what? If you live in a world where that's not the predominant EMF you get a different problem. And that's what we're seeing. So the easiest way to try to explain this to the non-scientist is, I have a very easy picture. And I know you've seen it many times, where you see the incident EMF come into the cell, goes through a calcium transporter, and then it makes free radicals. Well, here's the key point. The frequency that comes in is what determines the free radicals are made. The free radicals that are made determine how the respiratory proteins do this. And the length, the distance, determines the allergy you get from EMF. In other words, what system is going to be knocked out of whack in the body? And the reason why people struggle with this disease is because they don't realize how many frequencies are in the electromagnetic spectrum. So I'm going to give you another factoid that I've given, members, but I don't know how many people who are listening to this are non-members. Within the visible portion of the spectrum, that's 250 to 780.
Right.
There's 81 followed by 36 zeros frequencies there. And that only makes one octave of 73. So to scale this in people's heads, within a cell, there's 100,000 biochemical reactions that have to be controlled per every second. So when you have 81 and 36 zeros, the only thing that has that range and power to control those things is light. I mean, when you think about that sheer number, I mean, some of you, while I'm talking, write 81 and 36 zeros down. Contemplate that number and then put 100,000 next to it. That's a 1 with 5 zeros.
Right.
So the level of control, remember, each one of those chemicals in you is controlled by a specific frequency of light. See, your cell is designed to work within that 81 and 36 zeros thing. And we forget that specificity is actually what makes the free radical signals. So since 1996, and the FCC decided, well, we're going to use everything between Schumann and the visible, and now we're even using stuff above the visible.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Anything above the visible, everybody knows. That's like cosmic rays, gamma rays, and X-rays. Pretty much everybody knows those are a problem. Why? Because they do direct DNA damage, meaning they ionize the DNA. The dermatologists and eye doctors believe the frequency right above on the fringe of the visible, called ultraviolet, is bad because it also ionizes electrons. But it turns out that's the part of the visible spectrum that humans really need. Why? Because that's the part that gets through from the sun down to our atmosphere to us. And the crazy thing is your retina cannot see it. Even though it's present, you can't see it. So we're designed to see about 390 to about 780. Okay? Anything from 780 to, say, 3,000 is also present. That's the red spectrum. But you can't see that either. You need infrared detection system in your eye. So why is it that nature built you with this amazing thing called an eye and doesn't allow you to see two parts of the visible spectrum? Well, it's very simple. This is where the laws of quantum mechanics come in. See, there's this famous saying that if you see something, it changes the observation of the experiment. So that means if we're using this for signaling in our body to do these things that we just talked about, to control those 100,000 biochemicals in our body, if we actually were able to see it, it would change the biochemical pathways in our body. It would change the existence that we get. And that's called the quantum Zeno effect. Again, it's not important for you to remember that. It's important for you to understand why you are blinded to two of the frequencies in the visible spectrum. So your eye camera, the one that the doctors focus in on the most, those are the ones all in between there. That's the one that you hear about. And it turns out we do certain things to our eyes that actually set us up for problems. Why? Because we don't realize when we change the refraction of our eyes, it changes the light the brain sees. And the brain, the eye, your optical density everywhere in your body is designed to work between 600 and about 1,400 nanometers. That is in the red range. See, we are really beings of light, but we are beings of red light. And it turns out the things that are massively important for what I call my members mitochondriacs to get, and I think anybody with EHS needs to become a mitochondriac, is you really need to understand how a mitochondria works. There's 3 major chromophores in the body that work in the red range, and they all happen to be related to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin happens to be one. Cytochrome C oxidase is the 4th cytochrome. That's also a heme protein. Then the third one, which is probably the most common one in the body, and the one that causes most of our problems, is water. See, water is a red light chromophore. It absorbs from 600 nanometers all the way up to 3,000. But the crazy part is our human body is not designed to work with anything really over 1,400 to 3,000, even though the sun provides us with 42% of infrared A light. You still can work with a little infrared B. You just can't go hog wild crazy with it. So I begin to tell people with EHS, by definition, when you have that diagnosis, when you have any allergy to the light that man uses to communicate, it's going to lead to symptoms that really surprise us. So, and you don't mind, Scott, if I called you Scompy, because I'm used to calling your name on the site. I just posted something interesting, and I don't know if you read it yet, but I want to share it with you.
Okay.
Just a post in Scientific America that came out yesterday that had this very unusual link of millennials to strokes. Now, most people know that strokes are seen in people who are over the age of 50 or like their grandmothers. So one of the comments from the neurologist that was a stroke expert, he said, not only is this data shocking, he goes, but it also is not widely distributed. It seems to be in pockets. Well, you guys at EMF Warriors, you kind of know why. Why? Because you understand power density. But guess what? The majority of epidemiologic studies, the majority of biologists, the majority of clinicians, the majority of functional medicine doctors, the majority of everybody who takes care of patients has no clue. But you know what you can do? Everybody listening to this podcast can literally walk into any hospital, talk to the chief nursing officer, and go up and say, do you have data that shows acuity and ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes that link to zip codes? And you know what you're going to find? Within the city of Seattle or within the city of Bend, you're going to see different diseases show up in different zip codes. So all it's going to take is from some very smart millennial mitochondriac who's studying to be a lawyer to put this data together and say, we have data point A, we have data point B, and then we have data point C. Then you're going to be able to triangulate, and it's going to take you right back to the tower that is emitting the problem. And then you're going to find out that, no, you're not crazy. It actually really does cause this problem, because the incident EMF that your body gets is what determines the free radical signal. And the free radical signal you make is actually what gives you the heteroplasmy rate. Yep. So let me explain the physics for those people who are interested, because it's really not that hard. I just did a talk in Vermont not that long ago, and I made a very striking claim to everybody in the audience, and I know it caught many of them surprised, so I'm going to give it to you here as well. If you understand E equals MC squared the way a mitochondriac would understand it, all of these weird diseases that we're getting in the modern world become very easy to understand. Why is that? E and M, E standing for energy, which is pure light, M standing for things with mass, in the mass equivalence equation. Why do they call it mass equivalence? Because things with mass and things with light fundamentally are exactly the same. What's the difference? On the M side right here, there's this other letter called C2. What is that? The speed of light squared, okay? So what does this mean? It means the environment that mass is found has to change compared to this for them to be equivalent. So what does it mean even simpler? It means when you slow light down, things with mass show up. So guess what your eye is designed to do? As it travels from the sun 93 million miles, it hits these aromatic amino acids in your eye, slows it down, and makes a thing called dopamine.
Yeah.
Okay? More light comes through, it's another aromatic amino acid that's got a benzene ring that absorbs UV photons that you can't see, and it makes a thing called melatonin. It turns out melatonin is the chemical that controls heteroplasmy rate in mitochondria. Shocking. Most people hear from the functional medicine doctors or the allopathic doctors, well, melatonin is important for sleep. They're right, but it's way more important than that. Turns out that melatonin is what controls heteroplasmy rate, and heteroplasmy rate is what controls disease, and heteroplasmy rate is why you got EHS.
Yeah. So one thing I was going to mention there about that is kind of what I was talking about earlier this week online. I was putting out the supplement is better than the supplement. And, most of these doctors go straight to like, oh, let's take all this extra melatonin. Let's, put all these other chemicals into our body that, yeah.
I'm not going to let you pound on my allopathic docs. Allopathic docs make bigger mistake of giving people prescription drugs. See, functional medicine doctors are the real offenders. Guys that sell supplements are the real offenders. And this is a really important point for people to understand. It's not that I don't like those guys. What they don't understand is when you introduce something that we make naturally from slowing light down and you take it exogenously, you affect the coupled system that's made in cells. So when I say coupled system, this is called positive feedback. This is called negative, okay? They're designed to work in a coupled system. What happens when you take something exogenously? It uncouples the system, and then anytime a system is uncoupled, what happens? This side extinguishes and this side extinguishes. Therefore, the system remains broken, and you wind up with a disease like EHS. That's the reason why many times people who take melatonin for long periods of time actually get worse than better.
Right.
And they'll get better initially, and then they don't understand why it doesn't work. And then what do? They dose escalate, and then they get worse and worse and worse. And that's exactly what happened to Michael Jackson. For those of you who don't know, everybody knows he died because he couldn't sleep and he needed Diprovan. And here's the irony. Do you know Diprovan is a mitochondrial toxin?
Oh.
Can't make this up. And what did he die from? Heart disease, right? A lot of people say, well, he died because they gave him an anesthetic and didn't put an endotracheal tube in him. That's true. But it's also a mitochondrial toxin. And anybody who can't sleep, by definition, has poor redox. So when you give somebody another medicine that affects bad mitochondria on top of it, you make them worse. And the reason why I love your term, supplements versus supplements, is because it makes the case that I've been making for probably 5 years, and why I've become, let's put it this way, I'm not high up on the list of the guys that make supplements. And it's not because I don't like them. It's not because I don't like the things they do. It's because they fundamentally do not understand how a coupled light system works, how positive feedback works. And my job is not to be liked. My job is to teach people how we really work utilizing light. And that's the key. I want people to understand fundamentally the proper decisions to make, because guess what? This whole business about light is very nonlinear. It's very counterintuitive. And that's what makes quantum physics so difficult for people to understand. And you see a lot of ad hominem attacks, especially on me, because people default, well, if Jack Kruse thinks he understands quantum physics or quantum mechanics, he's full of shit, because, Niels Bohr said anybody who thinks they understand it really doesn't understand it. I actually agree with what Bohr said. I think there's so much more to the bone with this than meets the eye. But guess what? There's a lot that we can explain about this modern disease paradigm that's out there that makes a shit ton more sense than people selling, the paleo diet or the bulletproof coffee or some other food supplement angle.
Right.
People always forget that food is also a story of light. And the entire food web on this planet is made by photosynthesis, which is what? The sun.
Yep.
The sun takes CO2 from the environment, mixes it with what? Water, and turns it into sugars. What does a mitochondria do? It reverses that. It actually takes sugar, breaks it into CO2 and water. And that water, here's the special part of the water for a mitochondria. That water is in the cytosol. It fills the entire cell with water. And what does water do when light hits it? Sunlight becomes an exclusion zone. It becomes coherent domains. It becomes a battery. It's what runs all the key things in your body. But, the biology books say, well, it's ATP. No, ATP unfolds proteins to allow more water to bind to it to make more energy when you're in the sun. So the sun is actually the EMF that we actually need. And we're designed to be addicted to the sun. This is the shocking thing for people. When I sit down and talk to dermatologists or eye doctors, and I point out to them that sunlight makes a chemical in our brain called POMC. And you spell that POMC. It's got a big, long name, but it gets cleaved into 5 or 6 different chemicals. But two of the big ones that people need to concern themselves with. One is beta endorphin, which is an opioid. It's an opioid that addicts us to sunlight. I want you to think about that for a moment.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow.
Right. And here, this is what nature's telling us. And we have doctors saying, stay out of the sun. It's not good for you. So this is a really big disconnect. The other chemical that it gets cleaved to is something called ACTH, which most people know it's a precursor for cortisol. Well, remember we talked about how melatonin's made. That's one part of the coupled cycle. Cortisol's the other. That's how they work. One, cortisol, sunlight, and melatonin acts when it's dark. But melatonin is made by sunlight. In fact, every single thing on this planet, including the sun, was made when light slowed down and organized. And that is not a controversial statement. It's just when you say it to people the first time, they go, wow.
Yeah.
I never thought about it that way.
That makes total. Yeah, in my experience, it makes total sense. I mean, I used to have adrenal fatigue. I got rid of my caffeine and replaced it with the sun. I get up in the morning with the sun, and now I feel alert and awake after 10 minutes I'm out there, and I'm good for the day. It's like getting my hit.
Well, Scampy, let me ask you a question. You remember just a couple of days ago in our private Facebook groups for members, I posted that very interesting link to all the chemicals?
Yeah, I saw caffeine there. Yeah.
Right. And, I don't know if you do show notes on your podcast, but I'm giving you permission to share that. Because, normally I only share that kind of information with my members.
All right.
But I think people would be shocked to read that little post. If you really want to know.
I remember one of them on there. I remember the morphine.
Right, exactly. And that's part of the reason why when people want to know why they're so addicted to coffee with fat in it, I can actually explain it to the nth degree. And it's also explains why I'm not a big fan. People that have any type of mitochondrial disease at all, you need to shy away from things like that. And you're going to be drawn to it. Remember, you're going to be drawn to it because your dopamine level's low. Every time you use that stuff, it's a hit. And that's why you feel better. And you know what people with low dopamine always say? Well, what do you mean I can't use this? If I feel better, I'm going to use it. That's stupid. That's the whole mindset that's sold to the low dopamine masses. And that's a very hard thing for me to fight against. So how do I do it? Teach people the science behind it. Mm-hmm. And once you understand the science, all of a sudden I go from being a pain in the asshole to somebody who really cares about you, because nobody truly knows how much you care nobody truly knows how much you know until they know how much you care. Because if I was really arrogant and an idiot, would I spend the time that I do to try to teach people fundamentally what's really wrong? Because I personally think a lot of the people out there right now taking advantage of low dopamine humans, mm-hmm. they're going to be part of our team at some point down the road. I don't have any ill will to any of those people. I would just want them to understand why you can make a lot of money selling into this. I mean, you're a perfect person to speak about this because you are a platinum member. You know mm-hmm. the kind of level of science that I bring to my members. I just don't think that you have to truly understand a little bit about it. I get old members who've left. They always say to me, you've got to dumb this message down. And I'm like, that's exactly what a low dopamine person would say. Yeah. And the reason why is because they want to make it easier to understand. The problem is, think about what they're saying to me. They're saying, okay, Jack, we need quantum mechanics for dummies. Doesn't exist. Right. Now, do I think I'm doing a pretty good job trying to explain it? If you don't believe me, go back and listen to this podcast. I really explain to you the part of quantum mechanics that you really need to know. And I always have this famous saying, and Scampy's heard it before, why don't doctors have to treat lions and tigers and hippos? Mm-hmm. Why do they know what to do? Well, because they live underneath the sun, grounded in their own environment, and they do what the instincts tell them to do. Why? Because they're being directed by the environmental EMFs that are native to this planet. See, that's the key. The organism itself, the hippo, the lion, the tiger, their cells are organized to work a certain way within the framework of light as it falls to this planet. So are we. Okay? The problem is we're the only stupid animal on this planet that thought it was a good idea to change the EMF spectrum that we live under. Hence, we've created the low dopamine state. And the low dopamine state creates many other problems. It creates melatonin problems. It creates cortisol problems. It creates all the problems that we've kind of talked about. But why all these diseases seemingly show up out of nowhere, this is the key point, is because of what I told you before. When light slows down, it changes the structure of things with mass. That's how you can make bad chemicals. When somebody is probably listening to this thinking, so that's the reason why people get Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Yeah, where do you think the bent proteins come from? Everybody knows the bent proteins are in there, but the bent proteins in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and frontal temporal dysplasia, they're not the same. But the mechanism is, why? Because the light has been slowed down to different frequencies.
Yeah.
And that causes the proteins to misfold and the disease to manifest.
Yeah. Like straight in the mitochondria, right? Like from Wallace's work, I think about like, okay, the ATPase is trying to spin at this certain rate, and it's spinning and it's spinning, and it suddenly it starts spinning slower, and the whole system starts to fall apart at that point. So then you got your heteroplasmy. I'm getting a little probably deeper for like the audience. They know what we're talking about, but we're actually I'm putting together a draw shot video to try to simplify this for the mitochondria intersection here. But yeah, like these systems expect balance. You're, like you said, the beneficial EMFs of the sun, grounding. It's why, like elephants, I remember reading that article, why elephants have the lowest cancer rate.
Uh-huh.
Same kind of stuff. So
the real key thing for people to understand, if they just get the take-home point that we're designed to operate under 250 to 780 with our 2 feet on the ground so that we can capture that standing wave that's in the ionosphere called the Schumann resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, when the Schumann goes away, what do we see in humans? Like, if we had unlimited resources, me and Scampy, the first test that I would recommend everybody go out and do is get a sleep and awake EEG, and I'd look for the voltage change in your alpha wave. Why? Because anybody who cannot sense the Schumann, which most people with EHS can't, are going to show up an abnormality in that area. And they lose the alpha wave. You lose the alpha wave, that sets the chain of events down the path. There's many other ways to do it. I mean, I'll give you another one that'll shock you. There's a really cool guy who I met in London, who's a researcher in UK, when I went over there to do the biohacking event with Jamie Ward, who's a gold member on my site. Mm-hmm. And he had mentioned somewhere, probably a year after I mentioned him, that he found some really interesting footprints on heart rate variability. And I said, of course you did. Because you know what heart rate variability really is? It's a frequency signature of how sunlight interacts with red blood cells. So when you interact well, you make a lot of chaotic frequencies in the blood plasma. And when you don't, you make less. And guess what happens when you make less? Blood glucose goes up. And he, literally a couple of weeks ago on Facebook, when I posted this, he goes, I knew about this phenomenon. He goes, but I didn't know what caused it. He goes, you figured it out. I said, it's pretty simple. It's not that hard when you understand that red blood cells, absorb 250 to 600, and you go, okay, well, the sun goes 250 to 780. So maybe when specific sunlight comes and raises the blood vessels up to the surface, mm-hmm. and that hemoglobin gets irradiated, it's got to turn electromagnetic waves into electromechanical waves. And that's the reason why heart rate variability has been found to be linked with poor and good health. And here's the crazy part of HRV that you really need to know. This is another measure. People who have EHS are going to have way altered heart rate variability scores in different ways. And the reason why is because they're not able to make as many chaotic frequencies in the collision between red blood cells and sunlight. And the reason why is their skin is going to be too thick, too thin, or when UVA light comes later in the morning, it doesn't raise the blood vessels up to the surface for the red blood cells to get irradiated. And people have forgotten that when light crashes into something, it turns into another type of wave. It can be a light wave, but it also can be an electrical wave. It can be a magnetic wave. Mm-hmm. It also can be sound. Right? And sound is called an electromechanical wave. Well, we use all this transformation. We can change light into so many different things in our body to do so many different things. People are kind of shocked to hear that. Why? Because it's not something they learned in biology class. It's not something that they heard, whether they're a chiropractor, a functional medicine doctor, a neurosurgeon, or even a dermatologist. But guess what? If you open up a physics book, if you open up a biophysics book, if you go back and read the last 100 years, the work that's been done on light, you start to go, why isn't anybody putting this together?
Yeah, like I've got some Phonon producing stuff right behind me, if you can see. But yeah, it's like what you're saying. Like everyone intuitively knows that they play their favorite song and they blast it, they feel better. It just
But I
goes
don't
into
know
this. You
why.
know,
It's
they're
gotta be.
out walking through, like what I was doing last winter. I was walking out through the snow, and the snow was hitting the ground, and I just felt like at peace and at ease. It was calming.
Yeah. Well, people, you know what the problem is? Since humans have this brain, they want to know why. In other words, they're not like the hippo or the lion. See, the hippo and the lion accept the givens and live within them. We don't. And we have this amazing thing in our head that allows us to break all these natural laws because we have wants, desires, and needs. The other animals don't have that. So I used to have a member who I used to say this to all the time because it was one of his key problems that he just couldn't break through. I'm like, look, if you can't explain it, it's woo. Okay, it's pseudoscientific. And most of the things that he believed were true, but he couldn't explain it. And I told him, I said, Josh, I'm telling you right now that I know what you're saying. I know what you believe is not woo, but you're going to make no headway until you begin or till you're willing to sit down and understand how it happens. And, you know, when he left my tribe a long time ago, probably over 2 years ago, we didn't get into the level of sophistication that we're into now. And I personally think now it's way easier to jump aboard the Jack Kruse train because I tried in the beginning to teach people all the fundamentals. Now I realize I'm just going to teach you about light, water, and magnetism. And I'm going to, when I get done with you, you're going to know a lot more about mitochondria than you can ever imagine. And that's the key. Once you become a mitochondriac, then you begin to understand how things work. And you begin to see links to things that other people didn't see. And that happens not magically. It happens because as you build your dopamine, how do you build dopamine? Light is one way, through UV light, exposure. Cold is another. What's another way? Scampi just said, music. Okay? What's another big one? People. I mean, Scampi will tell you on my website, I have a rule. If you come on, you have to have a human picture. Guess what the reason is? We don't get the level of communication that Scampi and I would get if we were together looking at each other's face. That would raise our dopamine level up. But believe it or not, even through the power of the internet, if I say something that resonates with you, you're going to get this little feeling like, yeah, I get that. And that is your dopamine raising. See, that's why humans are social primates, because we like to be together to share different ideas. That's how we learn. That's another way that we raise dopamine. So that's why I always tell people who come to me who are demolished that if you're really, really sick, I want you to look at the 5 or 6 people that you rely on because they're probably not the best people for you in your life.
Right.
And people don't want to hear that shit, you know, but that's the truth. Those people are usually energy vampires. It's part of the reason why the divorce rate these days is so damn high because we live in this environment sucking the energy out of us. We lose our dopamine level, and all of a sudden the woman that we love for 20 years, we can't stand anymore. And we don't know why. We think, oh, well, she's changed. She doesn't put enough butter on my beets. No, that's not it. Okay? There's something that's around us. It's like the Matrix. You know, the red pill or the blue pill. Which one do you want to see? And the reason that people don't see it is when their dopamine level goes down low enough, the answer can be right in front of your face, and you still don't observe it.
And it's funny, it is right in front of our faces and also invisible, unless you got a meter to know it's right in front of your face. You know, it's interesting you're saying this.
The blog that you wrote, the blog that you wrote really hammered that point home. And, you know, I really appreciated when you did it because I think we're all in this together. I mean, each one of us have our different parts to bring. And I think once you understand the message that I'm trying to teach people, do I think there's 1,001 different ways to show this? Yeah, that's why, you know, I'm supporter of you and you guys doing, you know, your own thing with the EMF Warriors, because I look at all of you as starfish. As long as we get this message out and try to help people, right, no matter how we do it, you know, your pictures, your videos, your podcast, when you focus in on different diseases, that's key, man. Look, not everybody connects the same way. If it did, we'd like each other. You know, people who hate Trump wouldn't hate him. People who like Trump would, you know, wonder why the other people are crazy. That's really what's going on in our world, and we don't really seem to understand it. We'd much rather fight with each other than understanding fundamentally that maybe the reason we're fighting with each other, that the environment that we've chosen is the real problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. The believability of this issue I've encountered, for the last 5-6 years, people just don't believe it until I actually put that meter in front of their face. And then also the believability of the biophysics, right? We're taught, even me going through at Oregon State University, getting my degree, working at Stanford, all of the biophysics was omitted from my education set. I had been trained deeply in the biochemistry, but not the biophysics. And once really I discovered you and other people and came on to the biophysics and really dove into that, that's when I realized, wait a minute, it's like the machine's working, this car's running, and okay, we got the fuel, we got the biochemistry, we got all this stuff, but what's really the thing that's driving that biochemistry even?
Right.
And
the internet. What's driving the internet? We turn the light source off, it's over.
Right.
Pull the plug out. What happens to your iPhone when it doesn't work? People forget electricity is fundamentally light. It's just a plasma in a different form. That's it. But you know what? When you say that, people go, whoa.
Right. It's shocking. Yeah.
They're like, did you really just go there and try to blow my mind? No, it's freaking obvious. But you know what the problem is? It's obvious to somebody who has a high enough dopamine level to understand it. And I personally believe that dopamine level is a function of consciousness. It's a dynamic state where a low dopamine state, you're not as conscious. Some people listening to this will say, well, that's an arrogant thing to say because you're basically saying people that are low dopamine are stupid. I'm like, no, they're not stupid. They just see, they don't observe. There's a difference. Stupidity is actually knowing the truth and ignoring it. There's a difference. Most of the people who have low dopamine really don't know the truth because they can't observe it. Okay? And the other bad problem with dopamine when it's low is that you don't connect dots really well. Anybody who knows me, anybody who's met me will tell you that I am the penultimate dot connector. And the reason for that is because I do everything possible to stimulate my dopamine level any way I possibly can, because to me, that's the keys to the kingdom. I've got my own set of issues because of my job and the things that I do, but I try to mitigate those and I'm trying to fix those, myself. I'm under no illusions that I suffer from the same physics that everybody else does. But the difference is I protect my mitochondria here versus in other places. And that's what people don't realize. This zip code is different than this zip code, different than this zip code.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's the key. You have to make a determination, okay, which zip code matters the most to me, and then go for it. And like with electromechanical hypersensitivity, that disease is a global systemic effect of all of your mitochondria. It means anytime you're in that altered world, that altered light frequency, you are going to act in an altered state. And that state is going to vary by what EMFs you're around. And you've had sometimes where you get the tinglies in your mouth and then you'll get tinnitus. And you'll be like, why is this happening? That's the reason why, because you know what you're doing? You're like a light antenna for the non-native EMFs that you're going through. And people don't realize that proteins in our body, inside our cell, are light antennas. What surrounds them? Water. So when the light hits the light antenna, it turns into an electromechanical wave that the water absorbs. Well, if the protein is shaped like this versus this, do you think the resultant signal is going to be the same? The answer is no. And that's the reason why the system starts to act crazy. That's why when you get tinnitus, when you're hanging out with your friend and he's on Facebook, constantly, and you're at a Soundgarden concert, you shouldn't be shocked that this is happening. But unfortunately, people are. Why? Because they live their life thinking that, well, everybody else does it, so I can do it, so I don't understand why this is affecting me. And the key is the environment you allow. Yeah. And then the only way to fix these problems is redox. You have to redox before you detox. That's part of the reason why I have a huge problem with the functional medicine doctors. They pound on my profession saying, oh, these allopathic doctors, all they do is give you prescriptions and they don't get you better. It's true. But what they don't tell you is all crap they do does the same, but just because they're giving you a different excuse makes you feel better. In other words, it's another thing to go in and fail with. Why? There's only one thing that builds redox. That's sunlight on the water that your mitochondria makes. If your water is not in your cell, you don't take the C from the ocean and figure out how life on land did it. It did it by stealing a mitochondria.
Yeah.
That's how we stole the sea and brought it on land with us. And that water inside us has to interact with that native EMF, 250 to 780. That is the Goldilocks zone.
Nice. What you just said there really resonates with me with having a zip code in each place of the body, because I've explained this to people on our Facebook site. Like when you think about this issue, you have to think about the proximity of the exposure of the non-native EMFs with where you're using it. Like if you're using it down here on your gut all day long, I'm going to say expect some gut problems to occur.
Well, right? You know what people don't realize? It's back to physics. It's called the inverse square law. Okay? Everything in magnetism works on the inverse square law. So the further it's away from you, the less the effect is. The closer it is to you, the worse it is. Uh-huh. So why do you think Steve Jobs got the outcome he got? Well, what do they call this stupid thing I got? It's called a laptop. You put it on your lap. Guess where your pancreas is? Right where your lap is. You want to know where else? People put the cell phone in their pocket. Did you know that the pancreas is a retroperitoneal organ? Guess what? What does that mean in English? It's closer to your back than your front. Mm-hmm. Okay? When you put the cell phone in your front, you want to know why all millennials' testosterone is 350? I got some news for you. That's the reason why. It's closer to your gonads. So that's the reason why in the Apple pullout, they always say, well, if you have the phone, keep it a certain distance away from your head. They know the deal. They just are hoping you don't know the deal. And that's why the screens are blue lit and not red lit. Because when they're blue lit, you become an obedient idiot because it lowers your dopamine level. You stop asking questions about these kind of things. It's like, man, there's no way this could cause this problem. And guess what? When you start to look at the science, you start to look at guys like me and Scompy and go, this is interesting. Now, many people say they're not doing it on purpose. I'm going to disagree with that. I think they know exactly what they're doing. And
yeah, there's a city called Las Vegas that I've heard about.
Exactly. And how do they take your money? Well, if they can make you dopey for as long as they can by putting you in blue lit casinos, you're not going to come home with money. That's why they call it the city of lost wages. That's how they build billion-dollar hotels. It's not because the girls' titties are so nice and, the gambling's so fun and the shows are so great. There's an ulterior motive here. Look at any one-armed bandit. You know what the one-armed bandit is? Look at the lights. Scompy, that should be your next guest blog. Take a trip to Vegas with your spectroscope and your EMF stuff, dude. And I think it would floor people.
Yeah.
With your tools to go there and just say, hey, look.
There's so much fodder out there. The next thing I was thinking of is just sitting in on a class in college. I can go right over the mountains and go back to my alma mater and sit in on some classes and look what's going on with the students around there in the classroom with the professor.
Right, with all of them with laptops or iPads,
right,
cell phones. I mean, if you just count all the wireless devices everybody has and multiply it and think about the inverse square law, and then you want to know why college today is different than it was in the 60s, how about you start there? And, in the 60s, everybody was outside smoking dope and drinking on the square. I mean, the smoking dope and the drinking's bad enough, but at least they were outside.
Right.
And people just don't see this change. It's like, I say it all the time. When I was a little kid, I used to go outside to play all the time when I came home from school. Now, kids never go outside. And they don't realize technology has brought us inside the power grid, and we wonder why people are electrosensitive. To me, it's like, I wonder why we're all not worse than we are. And that tells you that we have an incredible resiliency built into the system because the human primate has massive mitochondrial capacity. The problem is your mitochondrial capacity is a function of your maternal mitochondrial DNA. So if you come into this world with shit on that end of the equation, you're going to wind up with childhood cancer, childhood ADHD, autism. You're going to wind up with EHS early on. You're going to wind up as a fat kid. Wherever your zip code's bad in your body because that mitochondria is bad, that's the disease you get. I always love talking to the ladies who have Hashimoto's, and I say to them all the time, well, how much do you use social media? I'm like, oh, well, like everybody else. I said, well, do you use it like this with this part of your neck exposed? And they're like, yeah. I said, okay, that's why you got Hashimoto's. I said, you know how you could fix that? Just do this.
Thyroid.
We have a member that I don't think you know, but she came to see me a year ago, and I told her a really cool biohack to do with red light laser. Guess what? I just got an email from her last night. First time in her adult life, she has no TPO antibodies at all, and her doctor is stunned.
Wow.
Amazing what red light can do, huh, dude?
Yeah.
When you blue light toxic here and you add red back, guess what the morning sunlight is all about, Scott? It's balanced, red and blue. So guess what we're back to? Our circle again, aren't we? What changes the circle of sunlight? Well, a little bit later, this other guy comes along called UVA. What does he do? He does nitric oxide release in your eye and your skin. What does that do? Vasodilates you further to bring the blood up. Why is that important? Because the red light, that's part of the blue stimulates the pituitary release hormones. The balanced red, what does the red do? It energizes your blood, but it also energizes your mitochondria. And guess what the key is? The red allows you to be ready. It preconditions your skin and your eyes to absorb UV. So that's the reason why if you don't get the AM sun, when you go out midday sun, you can get sick. See, that's where the dermatologists have it partially correct. But it's not that the sun is toxic. It's that the idiot that's got the problem never goes out from 6 to 8 o'clock to get balanced visible light. Balanced visible light is blue and red. All the colors in between works the eye camera. We're not interested in that in this discussion.
Right.
We're interested in those two. Those two, when they're present together, get you ready for UVA. And you have to realize that. That's why they call it diurnal, because the sun changes no matter where we are. The sun changes less on the equator, but the further we go from it, it's bad. And Scampi found out that you actually can go further north if you go up.
Yep.
Then UVA will show up sooner. He showed it with a spectroscope. See, so that means he's a smarter primate. He raised his dopamine level to figure that out utilizing one of his meters, and he shared it with the world. So that's a way for you to mitohack, a bad situation where you can improve it. Sometimes the answers aren't where you expect them. They're shocking.
Yeah, like what you just said is that's really been what I'm thinking about, how society views how they want to solve their problems. Typically, they have an additive approach. They're like, I want to add in the supplements, I want to add in the food, I want to add in that. It's really the omission elements, like omitting the sun, omitting all of these processes. Like I'm thinking like the EHS person might just simply be omitting so much sun in their life. And then just with the ambient exposures from the power grid, everything else, just over the course of years, you're going to have something develop.
If you ask me, that's what I think the issue is. I think fibromyalgia is the same. I think fibromyalgia and EHS are on they're same train, just different stops on the stations. Mm-hmm. That's it. And I think the thing with fibromyalgia especially, it's a real lack of infrared A. Most of the other disease, like adrenal fatigue is too much blue light through the eye. Right. And that's the crazy thing. It's all these little frequencies. The dose that we're designed to get leads to the disease we got. So once you get people to understand that the incident EMF ties to the free radical signal, and the free radical signal is what changes the size distance between the respiratory proteins, all of a sudden you start going, okay, now I get why Jack says redox before you detox. Why? Because you got to shrink those things up. And the only way to shrink them is to get them in the sun. Mm-hmm. And the way to do that is to make water from the mitochondria. The water goes around those respiratory proteins. And when it heats up in the sun, it shrinks. Yep. Okay. Cold water expands. And the expansion of water confuses people. I've got a couple of, I don't want to call them obedient idiots, but they're critics. They're skeptics. Well, they don't realize that water at large scale is different than water at small scale. Small scale water, we're talking on the order of nanometers, okay? Small. It reacts 180 degrees opposite what the ocean does when light hits it. And it's blatantly obvious. You can read any biophysics book, and researchers, not only has Pollack touched on it, but the real researchers to read are Maywan Ho, who's now dead, Juse, who's also dead, Praparta. They found this in the 1990s and early 2000s. This is like not new. It's been out for almost 20 years. But then you have guys coming on podcasts saying, well, that's wrong. Why? Well, what they do is they only look at, water in the ocean, bulk water. That's not the same thing. And when you look inside a cell, is there anything that's bulk, Scampy, inside a cell? No,
everything's against phospholipid bilayers building up against it. And
microtubules, collagen tubules.
That's right.
What is collagen? It's a triple helix. It's a tube of a triple helix. And guess what? Water is designed to touch every single part of that at the smallest scales. So why do I have a problem with people who spew half-truths? Why do I sometimes spit venom and go after them? This is the reason why. Because that little mistake can lead to a massive amplification. And it goes back to what Scampy just said, that people think about things linearly when we're built non-linearly. Mm-hmm. Meaning, what does non-linear mean for those people who are not science? It means small effect leads to massive amplification. That's exactly how light works. And that is completely counterintuitive to most people for things they think, 1 + 1 = 2. Well, it turns out in semiconductor, 1 + 1 = 4 almost all the time. Mm-hmm. And people don't get it. And because they don't understand nonlinear optics. And guess what? We are the most amazing nonlinear optical thing ever created. And my job is to explain as much of it to you as I possibly can. And it seems like I get more successful as I raise your dopamine level. And the easiest way for me to do that is to try to get you in the sun.
Yeah. Well, as a mitochondriac, I think about, all of the subtle stuff that you're not taught in high school about what the mitochondria is doing, just like, the density that are in the tissues, how the mitochondria can move around, like in the cell. Like there's even some stuff where the mitochondria can potentially even go from cell to cell in some studies I've read. Like it's interesting how the fluidity is there, but the fluidity makes sense for a balancing perspective, especially if there's like harvesting of energy required going on.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's crazy too, and I think confuses things, is you've seen me today in the podcast that we're doing. I've talked about the balance. The balance is important certain times, but realize that this balance is here for a reason. Blue light works non-linearly. Like if you look at one of the slides that I put out all the time, when sun rises, it's 1800 Kelvin. When sun sets, it's also balanced blue and red, but guess what? The color temperature is 1600 Kelvin.
That's right.
That's the reason why your eye at night pays attention with melanopsin. Why? It's looking for the high color temperature to drop in about an hour to two. That's how melanopsin works. So the system is not built the same way for the diurnal effect of morning light. That's the reason why AM blue light from the sun is a good thing, because it's what turns on the compound pharmacy in your hormones through your anterior pituitary as that light slows down with all those chemicals in your pituitary. The thing that people don't really truly understand is that blue light is different than all the other blue light during the rest of the day. And the blue light that we use is always at 5700 K. Yes. So if the cell phone is the first thing you put on, or this idiot thing that we're using now is the first thing you put on, your brain says, oh shit, it's new. We're already past the circadian window. Why? Because if you look at the circadian cycle of a human, when's all the key hormones released, Scott? 6 to 10 a.m.
Yep, in the morning. Yep.
Guess what turns it off? When UVA shows up. When UVA shows up, that's what turns the compound pharmacy off. People, you know who the biggest offenders of this are? It's the functional medicine anti-aging doctors. What do they tell women to do? Oh, just put the hormones right on your skin. And I go, I mean, it's you're spending $200, $300, $400, $500 a month, and you're putting this on skin exposed to UVA light.
Right.
That doesn't make any sense at all. And that's the reason why the way you do things, it actually announces to the world whether you really understand biology and light and whether you don't. And I would tell you, this is what I teach you guys. You silver, gold, and platinum members. I teach you that little nuance. I think the first couple months you join, I aggravate the piss out of you because I teach you just how these little things, and I point these things out when we do our member Q&As. And you know it, Scott, you should talk about that because I think it's really important for people to understand, I'm not doing this to be a pain in your ass. I'm doing it to get you to realize I want your perspective to be, okay, I need to think non-linearly first. Then I can go linear. Because most of your friends, most of your network, they are linear thinkers because that's what the education system builds. We're taught, like Scampy said earlier, a biochemistry bias is basically an equilibrium bias. Turns out when you have a nonlinear system, it means that we have a non-equilibrium bias, meaning we're designed to be far from equilibrium. Meaning the only time we're at equilibrium is when we're dead. Okay, when we're in rigor mortis. That's when we are in equilibrium with the environment. And that scares people when I say it because a lot of people who aren't scientists don't know what that means. It means that balance means death. We are designed not to be balanced.
Right.
We're designed to be activated by the nonlinear aspects of sunlight between 250 and 780 and its friend called the Schumann resonance, which is a standing wave, which is just like that little ukulele behind his right shoulder. He strums those strings. Those are standing waves in the cavity. Well, that cavity is designed to be, it's an analogy for the ionosphere that we live in. And what's our ionosphere filled with now, Scampy?
It's RF back pulsing off like it goes up and can't escape a lot of the time. It's all over and it's growing exponentially.
And that's why people, remember what I said earlier, why everybody with EHS will likely have a destroyed alpha wave. Either the alpha wave amplitude will be off or the voltage will be down. One of the two, or if it's really bad, both of them. And that's the reason why EHS has variable symptomatology. That's why two people can have the same disease but have different symptoms, and the doctor will say, oh, these guys are crazy.
Right.
They're not crazy. And the thing is because they don't understand the nonlinear aspects of light. And I just don't want people to keep pounding on doctors because they got to know that I didn't learn any of this in medical school. I didn't. I only stumbled into this because of my own issue. You know, how did I solve my own issue? This is how, folks. You know, I had to go back and re-educate. I had to unlearn that equilibrium bias. And let me tell you, it wasn't fun. You know, it's kind of like when you realize the first 40 years of your life, everything you were taught, just about everything, is wrong. And often it's completely backwards. That's what a non-equilibrium bias can bring you to. That's the reason why when I say drinking coffee is a sign of blue light toxicity or a complete ketosis, like nutritional ketosis 24/7 platform makes no sense. Then people look at me like I'm nuts. Well, the problem is you need to understand my perspective and the way what I have done for the last 7 years on the internet is to teach people the mitochondrial perspective. I want you to focus in on that genome, not the DNA genome. Where the real problem with doctors is, we have a DNA bias. And with the DNA biases comes an equilibrium bias. That also is where the biochemical bias comes from. This right here is the fastball. This is the mitochondria. This is Doug Wallace 101. And can I make Doug Wallace understandable by giving you all these different analogies and these different perspectives? Every time I come on and do a podcast, I try to hit this from a different facet in a different way because I know everybody learns differently.
Yeah, it's a tough road. Like I said, I'm making this draw shop video, and I've really tried to make it so high level that it just gives them enough information to kind of get the basic structure of it. I mean, I'm thinking of like just the non-scientist out there that knows nothing of this, doesn't even know that there's even two separate genomes, you know, in the human. And of course, you got the plant genome as well in plants. But like all of these processes and how all this is interlaced, like I think can scare off people. But it
shouldn't scare people off now because here's the cool thing. When I first started this out 12 years ago, everything that we talked about today was already in my head. None of it was in a book. Well, guess what? You know, as a member, what do I always tell people? Now there's about 30 or 40 books out there about this. Now it's different aspects. It doesn't link it all together. To me, that's what membership of my site does. I try to put it together. Like when you ask me a question or we're talking on a webinar, what do? I'm making the links for you and you go, I got it. I got it. And see, that's the key. And the key is you're going to do that 5 or 6 times with me, and then all of a sudden you're going to be able to turn around and see somebody else on the forum make what a lot of people would say, oh, that's a stupid question. Actually, no questions are stupid. All questions are very bright, because what are they doing? They're open-ended, and a mitochondriac knows that they need to help that other person get to that level. If it becomes clear after 2 or 3 years that that person's not getting it, that means they haven't changed their environment. Their dopamine level's low. And guess what? The first step in helping anybody is they have to be willing to help themselves. Dr. Kruse cannot help. None of my starfish can help anybody else who has a low dopamine state who's not willing to change that dopamine state, because the environment that they've chosen is what's causing their problem. And that's why they need to seek things exogenously to make them feel better. And guess what? Nature's told you the answer. Your dopamine comes when you get addicted to beta endorphin. It's the only opiate that I know of that doesn't have any side effects.
Wow. Yeah.
That's the reason why you want it. And that's why when Scampy said earlier, I saw that picture of morphine. And he was like, now I'm getting it. I mean, I remember when Joe Gavin saw that and JT Mallon saw it, and they were like, so that explains the opiate crisis we have. No shit, Sherlock. We are inundated by this, and we don't see it globally. We don't see it in our own communities. I think a lot of my members do see it because I constantly point it out. I mean, if you really want to get a cool cross sample of really how Jack Kruse thinks, I'll give you a perfect example. If you really are a low dopamine person, I don't want you to make any value judgment on what I'm about to say. I want you to go to my Dr. Jack Kruse Facebook page and read every post for the last month. And you know what you're going to notice? You're going to start to pick up stuff that, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know this. I don't know that. But guess what? You did. You just didn't know how to connect it. The reason you don't know how it connects is because dopamine is what connects things. And it's not that you're stupid. Everything that I teach people, fundamentally, I know they've heard at one point or another. The problem is they don't see the connections.
Yeah, I feel that there's a larger connection that will happen to even lower dopamine even more as we move into the future, because we're, like you said, we're increasing the Gs. There's all these other, like the RF spectrum is being filled out and it's not going away. Like people think that, oh, we're going from 4G to 5G, it's being replaced. No, all that stuff is still there. It's not only there, more stuff is coming into it, as well as all these new frequencies that are also going to be coming into it. So just the potential of exposure just keeps going up and up and up, which then will lead a person to make these frequencies not necessarily available as prominently when you go out into the sun. That's really the intersection that's hard for me to really think about. Like if I'm outside, maybe a half mile away from a mobile phone tower out in the sun, am I being compromised because that is over there a half a mile away?
Well, you are, but the key question is how much.
Right, how much?
You know what the answer is? How much or little water your mitochondria makes. Because guess what? People forget water is a Faraday cage. It protects you from non-native EMF. But what's the only EMF it doesn't protect you from? The sun. Isn't that shocking? See, again, you're designed to be addicted to the sun. Water does that. Dopamine does that. POMC does that. The answer is right there. It's right there in every book. You are designed to be in the sun. The key thing is the closer you are to man-made light, the less water, the less C you can bring inside your cytosol. And water is the ultimate Faraday cage. And you said something interesting that I don't think people understand. As we go to 5G, you're going to use more high power density RF. That's the reason why the antennas are going to become less visible to us. They're going to be blended into normal life so you don't see them, but they're going to be more common and they're going to be closer to us. So what is that going to induce? It's going to induce huge ionic currents, electrical currents on the surfaces of things. But here's the flip side of that. The more you use those type of RFs, you have to change the amount of microwaves we use. So the microwaves have to be even more powerful. They get up in the terahertz range. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what that does? That makes water even vibrate quicker. And remember, 99% of all the molecules in our body is what? Water. And where's that water? It's not important here. This bottle is not important. It's what's in your cytosol from your mitochondria that is. And every time those respiratory proteins get bigger, you don't make enough water. And the less water you make, the more sensitive you become to non-native EMF. The less sensitive you come to the sun. That's the reason why, Scott. Mm-hmm. See, that's the counterintuitive part. People think that all light waves work the same with water. Not true.
That's right. No, I know, like just the properties of like you go from megahertz and you start getting to gigahertz. I mean, these frequencies penetrate through matter where the bigger, the up, the higher level RFs that they're planning on in their MIMO stuff and such, they have a hard time. They have to beamform this frequency because it just won't go through matter as well. So we're going to have like just like all of these things that are of course way under IR and our visible light spectrum that are just going to be, making things jiggle around inside of us even more.
That's exactly it. Anytime that light changes to another form of frequency, if your cell's not optimized for it, it ruins signaling and you wind up with a mitochondrial disease. That's fundamentally, anybody who's got EHS really should really like this podcast, because I think we hit this from just about every angle you could possibly hit it from so that you get it. Even the low dopamine people are going to start going, never kind of thought about it that way. Well, that's good. And if you want to think about it better, you really want to become a mitochondriac, go outside in the sun.
Yep.
Get in cold water. Talk to people who right now you don't like. I always tell people, I have a quote on Instagram that's pretty classic. It says, if you're a low dopamine individual and you know it, my best advice to you is to go find people who do not agree with you and make friends with them and stick with them a lot. Because when you say A, they're going to say B, it's going to piss you off, but that's good. You need to always keep hearing B, C, and D.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I love your tough love. I view this all as tough love, and there's very few people that, there's more people out there that want to appease people, and then when you appease them, you don't heal them. When you
appease them, you don't heal them, but they become good for wallet biopsies. Mm-hmm. And that's the key. And what low dopamine people don't understand, when you get a box every month and it costs you $1,500 a month, and you think the latest cool thing in a bottle with some kind of logo on it is like, I'm doing good. Okay. You're not part of my tribe. Guess what? You know what my box comes with that I sell my people? It's called the sun. It's called the Schumann resonance. It's called water. It's called mitochondria. And guess what? All I got to do is to show you that it's wireless, it's free, and you just need to learn how to use it. And I'm going to teach you how. See, I guess the box that I sell people is the knowledge that leads to the wisdom so that you can become a mitochondriac. And then the only thing I ask of my members is to teach another and then another. Because I have no illusions, Scott. I'm not going to save the world here, but I'm not looking to save the world. I'm looking to get about 100,000 starfish. Because if I do that, I know that I can help a lot of people.
Right.
There's certain people, they're beyond help because their dopamine level's so crashed they can't see it. So those are the people that come in and out of my life. And this is probably the hardest thing for people to hear. It's okay that people who previously were your good friends that you really do like go out of your life, because as your dopamine level comes up, you begin to realize, why am I hanging out with this person? Every time we're doing stuff that's causing my dopamine level to go lower. And, when you find that and you have that realization, that's when you start to cut energy vampires in your life. That's actually when your life begins to change. The real tough problem is when those energy vampires happen to be called spouses and children and mothers and fathers. Mm-hmm. That's when I tell my members that you have to focus in on you, because who in the world are you good for if you're not good enough for yourself?
Yeah, and everything you just said is really in my opinion, backed up by history. Because if I just fast forward or rewind 500 years into the past and think about, okay, we've got no power grid, we've got no cell phone, we've got none of this stuff, and we have to rely on each other. We have to be a tight community in order to survive. We have to be our own little tribe. And that's how all of humanity was up until we've been given all of these things that let us be like ultra independent. Uh-huh. That's the way I view this, like whole society. Yeah.
It's so crazy when you think about everybody calls technology progress, and I call it a de-evolution or a decognition, because that's really, when it's used the way we use it, it actually softens the brain. It doesn't strengthen it.
Yeah, we don't have the connections like the face-to-face connections anymore.
Look at the kids now. I mean, if you go to any like field trip with kids, they're all on their cell phone. They could be sitting right in front of a Renoir or a Van Gogh, and they're like, they don't even talk to the person next to them. They'd rather text them than talk to them.
Yep. Well, I think we could end it here. I've gotten so much information out of you already that maybe at some point I would love to do another interview with you.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much. I got overexcited there. All right.
That's a good way to end it, when the technology fails.
Yeah. Failed technology. Way to go. All right. Thank you, Dr. Kruse.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.